Disclaimer, not disclaimer. This teaching is not intended to replace studying the Torah on Shabbat. Rather, it is an extension of Torah study to learn from the sins of our forebears in the ancient past so we will understand the Torah's practical application in our own lives today. We will also regain our national identity, which is so greatly missing among us. Our true identity is not the nation of our biological birth, but with biblical Israel. And the patriotism for biblical Israel, which we so badly need, can be gained by identifying with the people and history of those ancient times. Always study the Torah of Yahweh, which is His instructions, teachings, and His law, rolled into one word, Torah. Not only on Shabbat, but every day we should meditate on His Torah, His law. Psalms 119, 105. Your word is a lamp to my feet and a light for my path. Deuteronomy 5:33. You shall walk in all the ways which Yahweh your God has commanded you, that you may live, and that it may be well with you, and that you may prolong your days in the land which you shall possess. Psalms 1:1 and 1:2. Blessed is the man who does not walk in the counsel of the wicked, nor stand on the path of sinners, nor sit in the seat of scoffers. But his delight is in Yahweh's law, His Torah. On His law, His Torah, he meditates day and night. Psalms 119, 174. I have longed for your salvation, Yahweh. Your law, your Torah, is my delight. Father, thank you for this teaching, and I pray that only your words will be heard and remembered, and anything that comes from me will not be remembered and will not flourish. And Father, I praise you and thank you again for this. This is how you helped me to understand over the years. And so, Father, I'm presenting this because you laid it on my heart. And so I'm asking you to just be in this teaching and to only have your words, your understanding to come through, because it's only your understanding that counts. And so, Father, be with us as we go through this and then as we have the discussion. I pray in Yeshua's name. Amen. This is a different format this week because I only had time to make notes. I didn't have time to write a script, so I organized my notes. That's because it was a chaotic, busy week. And I also know that the information I'm about to present is something that you probably have not heard before, or you may have heard it and before, but I'm presenting it here again. I've presented it before, but it's probably going to be different than what you've heard before. I first want to say that the book of Revelation's prophecies are written to all of Yahweh's people. The book of Revelation was written as a balm, soothing the persecution of those who were suffering under the Roman Empire in the 1st century. And those people were also had been suffering under Jewish persecution. And so the book of Revelation was a message from Yahweh through John to the people, so that they would know that there is an end coming for everything that we're going through for Yeshua's namesake. But it's written to us over the millennia, and it's written for the end times generation. So it's written to everyone, but it is specifically for the end times generation, those who will endure the last 7 years prior to Yeshua's return. There is a 2,000-year gap between the crucifixion and resurrection of Yeshua and his return, and there's a 2,000-year gap for the last 7 years, which we're hoping will commence within our own lifetimes. Now, we can't really understand Revelation unless we go back to the book of Daniel for some reference. Daniel 9:25 gives us 7 weeks and 62 weeks, which are 69 weeks of years. That's 483 years, which have already been fulfilled. And then the last 7 years are found in Daniel 9:27, when the beast man, the son of perdition, will make a firm covenant, or he will prevail in a covenant, as I said last week, with many, the ones that are cast together for 1 week of years, which is 7 years. So Yahweh did not tell his people how long the gap between the 69 weeks and the last 7 weeks would be. And we know these last 7 weeks have not been fulfilled yet. So believers in the first century, even the apostles, were thinking that the gap would be short and Yeshua's return would be in their lifetimes. That was almost 2,000 years ago. Yes, I have my notes on the screen. Are you not seeing the screen? I'm not going to stop and start over. Let me see if I can, come on. Well, I thought I might be, okay, let me just stop this and I'll see if I can share my Word document again. Where is my Word document? Right here. And I'll just have to edit all this out. Are you able to see it?
Yes.
Okay. So now we're going to talk about the first beast of Revelation 13, verses 1 through 10. Now, you know there are 2 different beasts in Revelation 13, and that first beast is a global beast. Revelation 13:1 says, "Then I stood on the sand of the sea. I saw a beast coming up out of the sea, having 10 horns and 7 heads. On his horns were 10 crowns, and on his heads blasphemous names." Now, those blasphemous names, this is going to be a little spoiler alert for you, because those blasphemous names are, 5 of them are the continents that are named after goddesses. And the one that was wounded, which I'm going to get to in a little bit, is Europa. Australia is not a goddess name, but the indigenous people there are occultists. And Antarctica is sometimes poetically referred to as a goddess or a spirit in modern artistical or environmental contexts. And that represents a fierce, untamed, and white power. So that's the blasphemous names. They belong to the 7 continents, and I'm going to explain how I get there. The sea is a symbol of people, but this could be any people or all of the people. So I'm going to tell you who these people are. In verse 7, it says it was given to him, the beast, to make war with the saints and to overcome them. Authority over every tribe, people, language, and nation. In verse 8, all who dwell on the earth. He was given authority over all of them. The beast was given authority. So this tells us, and there are other places also, but this is the one in Revelation 13 that tells us this first beast of Revelation 13, 1 through 10, is a global beast. Now, a beast symbolizes an empire. And this is an end times beast, and only an end times beast. There was nothing like this prior to this beast in the history between, when the Roman Empire fell, and, in the 1900s, there was nothing like this beast. None of the previous scriptural empires were global. I mean, it was global in the region. They were regional, and of the known world. But even in the known world at that time, there were other nations that existed. China existed, nations in Africa existed. There were nations in the north, in Europe, and so forth. Those nations existed outside of every previous empire. And I'll tell you who those empires are in a minute. Now, this beast has 7 heads. I'll go back up here, and it says he had 10 horns and 7 heads. 7 heads, see? Now, these heads are mountains, and we know that they're mountains because Yahweh defines these heads as mountains. Revelation 17:9 says, "Here is the mind that has wisdom. The 7 heads." This is Yahweh explaining to John what he's been seeing. The 7 heads, that's the symbol, are 7 mountains, which are also continents. And I'm going to tell you why they're continents. But it says on which the woman sits. And so now people have claimed that these mountains are the 7 hills of Rome or the 7 hills of Jerusalem. But they are global mountains or continents because this is a global end times beast. And it cannot be a revived Rome. And I'm going to go into that too, because some say that the 2 parts of the ancient Roman Empire, the eastern and western legs, will revive, and they'll come back together and return as the 7th beast. Well, that cannot happen. That's because there's no precedent for that in Scripture. None of the other beasts ever revived. See, Yahweh is not going to start changing his ancient prophetic patterns or redefining his terminologies in the end of days. And he's not going to do this because he doesn't want to cause confusion in his people. He doesn't want to cause us a lack of understanding. The whole reason that he gives us these prophecies is so that we will know what to look for. He wants us to understand. And he gives us the patterns and the definitions of everything so that we will recognize what's happening when we're in that last 7 years. But remember, there's the gap. And so there's everything in history that leads up to the beast of Revelation 13, 1 through 10. Now, there's been a prophetic mistake, and almost everyone makes this mistake. Starts in Daniel 7:7. "After this I saw in the night visions, and behold, there was a 4th animal, awesome and powerful and exceedingly strong. It had great iron teeth. It devoured and broke in pieces and stamped the residue with its feet. It was different than all the animals that were before it. It had 10 horns. I considered the horns, and behold, there came up among them another horn, a little one, before which 3 of the first horns were plucked up by the roots. And behold, in this horn were eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking great things." I used to think, and excuse me, I'm sorry, I'm having a little bit of drainage here. I used to think, like so many people do, that this beast with its 10 horns was related to the Revelation 13 and 17 beasts, but I no longer think this because I looked at the anatomy of this animal. This is an animal with one head, and the 10 horns sit on this one head. So this is not a beast with 7 heads that also has 10 horns. And then verse 11 says, I watched at that time because of the voice of the great words which the horn spoke. I watched even until the animal was slain and its body destroyed, and it was given to be burned with fire. As for the rest of the animals, their dominion was taken away, yet their lives were prolonged for a season and a time. The beast of Daniel 7, 7, and 8 is Rome. But notice that Yahweh destroyed it, but kept the other animals which appear in the composition of the first beast of Revelation 13, 1 to 10. That's the leopard, bear, and lion. Those are exactly what Daniel was seeing. Yahweh spared those animals, but he destroyed this fourth one. So it does not reappear in the end of days. Rome does not have a role in the end of days because the end times, Revelation 13, United Nations beast, and I'll tell you how I get there, does not include, I should put that word in there, does not include Daniel's fourth beast, which is Rome. It just says in Revelation 13:2, the beast which I saw was like a leopard, that's Greece, and his feet were like those of a bear, that's Persia, and his mouth was like the mouth of a lion, that's Babylon, and the dragon gave him his power, his throne, and great authority. So there's no Rome, there's no Roman beast in there. So now let's look at what and where are the 7 mountains, the 7 continents. Now, you remember, we're at the end of days. And so we can look back and we can see that history has been prophecy. Now, what are those heads? I've already read to you in chapter 17 that the heads are mountains. And I've said that those mountains are continents. Continents are nothing more than big mountains sticking up out of the waters that surround the earth. This is why the beast comes up out of the sands of the sea, because the seas are also global imagery. So at this point in our history, the United Nations governs 7 continents, directly or indirectly, via the national treaties with the UN. So right now there are 195 countries that are part of the United Nations. 193 of them are member states and 2 are non-member states. The UN then is the beast of Revelation 13:1. And it's also John's 8th beast of Revelation 17, 9 through 11. I'm going to go through that in a minute. The Revelation 13, 1 through 10 beast cannot be America, as as some have hinted at, or maybe some have even said. I'm not sure I've ever heard anybody specify that, but it can't be America. This is because this beast is not a national or a colonial beast, and even though America has over 800 bases in every country on earth, America and Britain are the majority of Ephraim and Manasseh. They are the majority of the house of Ephraim, the house of Joseph. Now, all the tribes are scattered all over the earth. But here's the thing. None of the beasts of Daniel or any of the beasts in the book of Revelation are ever presented as having their origins in any of the Israelite tribes. All the beast empires in Scripture are foreign to Israel. America, Britain, Europe, those, Australia, South Africa, the westernized nations, the house of Joseph, the house of Ephraim. Yes, we have mixed people with us, but we are the majority of the tribes that are scattered. So the UN is the end times eighth beast because of its direct and indirect control of all of the seven heads or continents. Now I'm going to explain to you why the UN is the eighth beast and not the seventh. We have to talk about the wound. That beast was wounded in Revelation 13:3. It had been wounded fatally, but his wound was healed, and the whole earth marveled at the beast, that empire that looked like it was going to perish. That wound was healed in World War II. The wound that happened to the seventh beast, which was the League of Nations. The European head, that was one of the seven heads, that's the continent of Europe, was wounded in World War II. The Berlin Wall, could be seen from outer space, and it's still seen from outer space. You can see where the wound to that continent still is today. The United Nations' eighth beast was created immediately after World War II ended in October 24, 1945. The war with Germany ended on May 8, 1945. So there's almost a 1900-year gap, for this beast, the League of Nations, followed by the United Nations, to get established. And then, the seventh beast, the League of Nations, morphed into the eighth beast, the Revelation 17:11 beast, so that we can get close to its having its reign, towards the end of the 2,000-year gap. So first came the League of Nations, beast number 7. I'm going to lay this all out for you in Revelation 17. And the League of Nations was the answer. It was created in 1920. It answered what happened in World War I. It was to stop all the wars, stop that kind of behavior between the nations. And at that time, it had member states from every continent. Thus, it sat on all 7 heads or mountains or continents. It was created to unify all the global nations together under one entity. The League of Nations from 1920 to 1946 was the first intergovernmental organization established after World War I on January 10, 1920, to promote international cooperation and maintain world peace. Headquartered in Geneva, Switzerland, it was created by the Treaty of Versailles, but failed to prevent World War II, leading to its dissolution and replacement by the UN. And I quoted that from online. So the World War II injured head, it was an injury to the head of one of the League of Nations. There was no United Nations during World War II. There was the League of Nations during World War II, and that 7th beast's head was wounded in Europe. Revelation 13:3. One of its heads looked like it had been wounded fatally. It appeared that it was going to die. His fatal wound was healed, and the whole earth marveled at the beast, that empire that looked as if it had perished. And so after World War II, it looked like world unity under one entity would never be again. It looked like that war had destroyed that ideology. The League of Nations then came back and was given another name. The League of Nations became the United Nations. And I'm going to show you in Revelation 17 where we account for this. It was Eleanor Roosevelt's impassioned speech which called the beast back to life and gave it a different name and a stronger charter. The UN Charter of 1945 differs from the League of Nations Covenant of 1919 by establishing a more robust, universal, and legally binding framework for international security. Key differences include the UN Security Council's binding enforcement powers, a stronger prohibition on war, the inclusion of all major powers, and a focus on human rights. And that quote came from online. So now we can see why the UN eighth beast succeeded this League of Nations seventh beast. And after that, then all the people said, in Revelation 13:4, who is like the beast? Who is able to make war with him? The idea of war is what caused the formation of the League of Nations. And when that failed, they made a stronger covenant under the United Nations to prevent war. That's why this says, who is able to make war with him? So, which nation on earth, out of the 195, can make a war that wounds one of its heads again? There isn't one. It was revived after its wound, which could have been a deadly wound. It was revived after that. All of the nations were ready to walk away from the idea that a global governing entity could exist until in that one particular session, Eleanor Roosevelt made that impassioned plea. So the seventh beast became the eighth beast because of the war that wounded it. Now, and it says in verse 4, Revelation 13:4, that they worshipped the dragon because he gave his authority to this beast, the United Nations, and they worshipped the beast. So to worship means actually to serve. The word worship in some scriptural contexts should be rendered as serve. Sometimes worshiping also means, what we think of worshiping. But in Exodus chapter 20, when Yahweh is talking about you shall not make images and you shall not bow to them and you shall not, it says in our English Bibles, worship them. The word abad is used. And abad means to work or to work for. By implication, to serve. So, our modern definition of worship prevents us from understanding that it's service, and all of our nations on earth serve this United Nations beast. The fall of the Berlin Wall that happened, that, cut, that was where the wound was, at the Berlin Wall. The fall of that Berlin Wall was not just an event. It was the further evidence of the healing of the wound giving people more reason to say who can fight the beast. And as I said, all of the nations on earth serve now the United Nations, and they do so voluntarily. This is man's attempt to create a global kingdom which will become a utopia in mockery of the promise of Yeshua's kingdom on earth. And of course, you know that the dragon is Satan, according to Revelation 12:9. The dragon was thrown down, the old serpent, he who is called the devil and Satan. He's the deceiver of the whole world. He was thrown down to the earth, and his angels were thrown down with him. So now we're going to go to Revelation 17:9. I'm going to show you where the beast empires go from the 7th to the 8th. So this section is called Numbering the Beasts, Revelation 17:9. Here is the mind that has wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains, plural, which I have said are continents, because continents are just great big mountains surrounded by water on which the woman sits. So the context in this verse is that the 7 mountains are actually a material reality. These are not a spiritual reality. They actually do exist, and there are 7 of these mountains or continents on the earth. Revelation 17:10. The 7 mountains or continents of the 7th and 8th beasts, are symbolized in 7 kings. So these mountains are symbolized, spiritualized now in the 7 kings. Now I'm going to tell you who these are, because right here in this verse it says to John, the man is talking to John, he says 5 have fallen. Who are those 5? Well, they're Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, Persia, and Greece. And then he says, and one is, where was John? John was in Rome. And then he says, the other has not yet come. In the time of John, the 7th League of Nations, that 7th beast had not yet come. But when he comes, he must continue a little while. So in verse 10, we shift away from the material reality to symbolism from the material reality of verse 9 to symbolism in verse 10. Why? Because verse 10 is an indicator of the strength of the end times 8th beast, which will have not only the ideologies of the former 6 beasts plus the 7th, but also their collective strength. You know, Yahweh's telling us something about the strength of this final beast. None of the former beasts in verse 9, or past verse 9, or in verse 9, I don't remember, I got a wrong word in there. I'm trying to figure out what note I was trying to write. In verse 9, none of those beasts of Daniel, none of the beasts of the 5 that have fallen, none of the one, even the one in Rome, actually sat on 7 mountains, 7 heads, or 7 continents. But as empires, in verse 10, each one symbolically was a mountain. Because symbolically, mountains can be governments. Materially, they are mountains, but they can symbolize kingdoms and governments. So there's a contextual framework here, and it's hard for us reading sometimes these things. We find them in Isaiah and Jeremiah, we find it in Daniel, we find, where it changes uses the same words and changes context. So we have to read in the context. And so now we go to Revelation 17:11, and we see where the eighth beast comes from. The beast that was, that the seventh beast, the one that is not in John's time, is himself also an eighth. So the seventh and eighth beasts are really the same beast, with the eighth beast being a strengthened iteration of the seventh. This beast is of the seven, and he goes to destruction. This beast has all of the former beasts within it, the leopard, the bear, and the lion. It has all of those collectively within it. And then because of its wound, and it coming back to life as the United Nations instead of the League of Nations, it now is the eighth beast. So the UN beast is like all of the former beasts and is a composite of them: Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, Persia, Greece, Rome, and the League of Nations. So this is the beast which the Israeli whore of Mystery Babylon, according to Revelation 17 and 18, rides. She's trying to control this beast. And we've been watching on the news for decades how, the Israelis control the United Nations. I mean, you've just got to, read the newspaper. This modern Israel is a child of the eighth beast, the United Nations, because Israel was created in the United Nations for the purpose of being a homeland for the Jews that no one else on earth wanted. So the creation of the Jewish state was actually a rejection of the Jews by the entire world. Modern Israel, the Zionist beast of Revelation 13:11, with the two lamb's horns, is the son of the United Nations beast, or I should say the grandson. Israel is the son, the beast man to come, in Revelation 13:11 to 18, is the grandson, which is why the Revelation 13:11 to 18 beast is a man from Israel. The UN beast of Revelation 13:1 to 10 will give his authority to his son. And, interestingly, and I think I have it elsewhere here in my notes, this is like Pharaoh giving his authority to Joseph. There is a real scriptural connection to this, because Israel claims Joseph. If I go to Israel and say, I'm from Joseph, I want to come home, they'll say, well, Joseph is already with us. We have all the tribal flags in our synagogues. And interestingly, it was America, one of the horns of the beast of Revelation 13, leading the way to resuscitate the first beast, then leading the way to take away the wall, that's the scar on the European head, and then rising to power with the nation of Israel it helped to create. Revelation 13:12. He, the man beast, who is the grandson of the United Nations beast, exercises all the authority of the first beast in his presence. And I already said this, it's just like Pharaoh giving his authority to Joseph, who was a Hebrew. And who are the Jews? Well, they're Hebrews too. So he, the beast man, makes the earth and those who dwell in it to not worship in our common sense, our common way of thinking about worship, but to serve the first beast, in Revelation 13, 1 through 11. And that's the United Nation, whose fatal wound, that of the League of Nations, which became the United Nations, was healed. And this is why the beast man wants people to worship the image of the beast. He is made in the beast's image. His nation, Israel, is the son of the beast. And so can you see the mockery of Yahweh, who made mankind in his image and afterward created his nation in his image? The devil can't do anything new. This is why Yahweh tells us what he's doing and what's happening on the earth, because the devil is predictable. He can't do anything that's outside of his nature. He thought that he could kill Yeshua and that would end his trouble. So he told the Jews, look for a military Messiah. And then, and that's Lucifer, Satan, Halel, the devil, whatever you want to call him, looking at the prophecies, reading the Bible, and saying, yeah, well, I know what's going to happen. He's going to come in and try to save the Jews, and he's going to have to use military force because there ain't no other way to save a people. And look at what Yahweh did in that first Exodus. They went out armed. All the Israelites were armed coming out of Exodus. And there was a war. And Yah saved them from the war. And then Israel came into being. And so that's what's going to repeat. Look for a military guy. And then, wow, Yeshua went on the cross because he defied that. And so Satan thought he could just kill Yeshua and that would be the end of it. Because he, like so many others, didn't necessarily believe in the resurrection. And so, you see, Satan can't do anything but what is common to his nature. And this is why Yahweh gives us these prophecies. And he gives us these in patterns. And he defines them for us. He gives us the definitions and the patterns. So if we know the patterns and if we know the definitions, we know what to expect. And so that now ends this teaching.